What's up, guys? Welcome back to Classic Octane. I am Taylor. I'm filming on the GoPro today because I plan on getting dirty. Hopefully the audio is all right. We'll kind of see how this goes. I want to jump on the Camaro project. You see I have it up in the air. Basically what we're going to be doing is getting as far as we can with the EFI system. So what I have is a FiTech Go Street, the 400 horsepower fuel injection. I have their command center. I don't intend on using it because some people have reported issues of it overheating, and living here in Texas, if it's going to overheat, it would certainly do it here. So what I'm going to go with for a fuel system is way overkill for the little 350 that we're going to have in it now. But what this is going to be is in preparation for the LS swap. If you guys remember from my last video, I do have a GTO. I put it in storage. I'll get into that later, but we're going to do this EFI to kind of hold me over until I do the LS swap. So we kind of went all out on the fuel system to support what we will be building. So I went with the Tanks Inc. Fuel tank. Has the proper mountings for an in-tank pump. I got their floatless fuel sending unit as well. The pump I'm going to be running, a good buddy of mine gave me this pump. It's a Walboro 400 liter per hour fuel pump. This thing will support probably 1,000 horsepower. I would say over 800. We're rocking like a hot 2 something with this little guy, but like I said, this is all going to be easily going to support what we're going to do long term with the LS swap. Here's the fuel hat that goes to. Lines, we're going to be running full 6AN line all the way back from the pump all the way up. So we're going to be teeing off at this fuel pump pressure regulator. Fuel filter fuel filter regulator, there we go. So you see the -6 lines in there. So that'll be our return back to the tank. A stainless line, has some 10 gauge wire. Here's a solid state relay. I've been trying to do some research on using this so that I can use the pulse width modulation that FiTechs can do. If you're not familiar with what that is, basically just think of it turning on and off the fuel pump hundreds of times a second to regulate the fuel pressure, because a fuel pump that's this powerful, if we're running this thing all the time, it's just going to have unnecessary heat, wear on the pump. This thing's going to have to run at like 10% duty cycle to support the fuel needs that we're going to have, at least for this engine. So instead of running it just on a standard relay where it's just full blast all the time, we can utilize the FiTech to, like I said, do the pulse width modulation to lower that run time on the pump. All the respective seals, Teflon tape that's rated for gas, and that's going to be it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start diving in, and should I remove everything first? Or yeah, I think that's probably a good plan. So I'm going to just start to remove the carburetor. I'm going to start to remove all the fuel lines. We'll work our way to the back and we'll pull out the factory gas tank, because we're not going to need any of that stuff with this new setup. Under the car now, and this is where the fuel lines run. There are 2 of them on some 69 Camaros, just because it's like a return or some kind of vent, I don't know. Either way, there's 2 of them. So I'm going to just kind of go and grab my impact, undo all these clamps, and can pull them off. This is where it kind of separates and has a little rubber U. I don't know if that's factory. It looks a little bit on the janky side, so I'm glad we're getting rid of that. And I won't bore you guys with the rest of this, but we're just going to kind of go all the way back to the gas tank and remove all the fuel lines. All the fuel lines out, not too bad. Threw a little tray under here right at the connection point so that I could drain the fuel out. Got quite a bit of fuel out of there, so I'm glad I put that there. You can also see this really terrible ghetto wiring job. When I bought this car, there was a huge electric fuel pump. I don't even know, I think it's somewhere around here, but they did not do a very good job wiring it up. I don't even think they used a relay. They just like ran it straight 12 volts, which is, yeah. Anyway, so now that all that's out, I want to go ahead and drop the gas tank. I intentionally haven't filled the car up in a long time, so it's probably got a little bit less than maybe an eighth of a tank, somewhere around there. What I'm going to do is I've actually have my motorcycle jack, this guy right here, which works perfect for supporting the gas tank while I undo the straps. So I'm going to go ahead and get that back there, support the gas tank, undo the straps, and then I can slowly let it down. Well, it looks like it's gonna rain and all the toys are outside, so I am going to make some room to put them back in the garage and we will try to continue working. Well, looks like we got the gas tank out just in time. I want to move on to setting up the fuel pump and everything in the new gas tank. So what we need to do that is measure that depth of that hole, and then we're going to need to cut this black hose to the proper length so that when this fuel pump is mounted on there, kind of somewhat similar to that, you know, the pickup is right at the bottom of the tank. I don't think we want it touching the bottom of the tank. I got to measure, or I got to look at the instructions and see what the measurement's supposed to be, but we want this just above the tank, and then we can cut this, hook it up, and then this will be ready to drop in with our cork gasket. Got the pump all modified, pretty easy, just basically following the directions of like total tank depth minus the full length of the pump, and then total tank depth minus, you know, whatever it is, inch and 5/8 or whatever to get the return line. The return line basically just goes right to the top of this so that everything can fit through the hole because it's a pretty tight fit. So got the gasket ready to go now. They recommend some gasket maker sealant around as well, just to make sure it has a good seal. Once we have this all in place, we will move on to our 1/4 inch NTP to 6AN for our feed and return lines. Jump to the next day, a little bit nicer weather, at least for now. So we're moving on to, we kind of have the fuel pump set up. We have our 6AN line set up for that. This is a vent, that is a vent. Worry about that later. I bought better quality terminals. These come with just these little tiny blue kind of cheap terminals, and I'm running full 10 gauge wire back here since I am running a heavier duty fuel pump. So I went to this style as the heat shrink and is designed for 10 gauge wire. Threw in this, super easy. This wiring is going to be easy as well. So there's the white wire goes to the sending unit as far as like what was already plugged in. Black is just going to be a ground. And then here we just have a positive and a negative. Like I said, I picked up some better quality terminals, so I went with these 10 gauge, 10 to 12 gauge, so it should be pretty good. This is the wire we're using. It's good quality automotive wire. It's like designed for stereos, but we got the power wire there, ground wire here. Bringing you guys underneath the car here. Got the new tank temporarily in place. And grab my flashlight. Looks like this return line is going to work perfectly. So it just goes around there, goes straight to the frame rail, and then up. It tucks in away from the exhaust. And then I mounted the filter regulator over here on the frame rail. There's already kind of an existing hole I could use. So that's nice and securely mounted. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm talking about. So basically what I need to do now is make a feed line that is almost identical in length to the one we already have. So I'm going to pull that one out, replicate the length of it, and then we will make up a new line. We'll have our feed to the regulator, and then after that we'll work on our long feed from the regulator all the way up into the engine bay. So we're going to give this a shot. Marked out the length we need. I think ideally you're supposed to wrap this in like duct tape, but we're going to see if a couple tight layers of masking tape will help us. I'm going to use my cordless angle grinder with a cutoff wheel and zip it right down there. The whole point of this is that hopefully the stainless braid doesn't fray. so that we can get it into the end of our AN fittings. So I'm gonna throw my safety glasses on and we're gonna give this a shot. I moved over to my big mounted vise with my rubber jaws in there, so that way I can really clamp onto the fitting itself and then use both hands to push in all the way, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to see that. I can almost guarantee probably not, but to where the hose is butted up against the little shoulder in there. Now that that's done, I can rotate that up, then this piece will screw down into it. Just making sure to keep an eye on the fact that we don't want these hose to be pushed out of the bottom. You know, ideally it's in there expanding out, and that's what's give you a good seal. So we'll rotate this up 90 degrees and slowly screw this in, making sure it doesn't push it out, and then that should be the first one done. There it is, my first official AN line. So really not too bad. When I make the next one, I'll just videotape and walk you guys through the whole process so you can see it. I wanted to do one or two just so I can kind of get an idea and not steer you guys down the wrong path, but yeah, I think it worked pretty well. I can't imagine trying to do it without a vise with the proper. You could probably do it without the rubber jaws, but you're just going to really mar up your fittings. These rubber jaws I got off Amazon for super cheap, and they just literally magnet on over the steel jaws. So awesome. Those came in very handy. Also have some aluminum ones too, but the plastic ones worked well. So here's our high pressure fitting fuel line for the tank to the regulator. So I'm going to go ahead and jump under there and make sure that this fits well. If it does, then we will move on to the long fitting all the way up to the engine bay. Got the fuel line kind of just run along the frame rail back to that regulator and then up into the engine bay. So now I'm just kind of trying to determine, I put our 90-degree fitting, obviously went ahead and threw the throttle body on. This is where it's going to connect, so it'll probably just have it run down here, kind of loop back around by these heater hoses and then kind of run straight down. So just going to kind of route it in the ideal spot, leave us a little bit of slack. I'd rather have, you know, a little bit of extra than having, you know, not enough, obviously. And then we'll just line it up and then all the way to the end of that fitting, mark it with a blue Sharpie. We can pull it all out, cut it, and throw our lines on. Now that I have my 3 fuel lines done, what I'm going to do is go ahead and drop the tank down. I'm going to hook up my terminals for power and ground, leave these just long, hook up my sending unit wiring as well, and the 2 lines that go into that. Just basically get the whole top of the gas tank buttoned up, put it back up in the position and put the straps on it and kind of have it up for the final time. Then we can work on running the fuel line the rest of the way up and then running the power. And I'm probably honestly going to run a ground alongside it. I'm thinking about just running the ground straight all the way to the battery. I'm going to be running the cable anyway. I have enough wire on mine. It just seems like not a terrible idea just to know that we have a nice good ground for our fuel pump. So I'll probably do that, run the fuel line and then run the power and ground for the pump all the way up to the engine bay so that we can just go straight to the battery. Here's what everything on the top of the gas tank is looking like. I ran the ground for the sending unit to the same ground as the fuel pump since we're going to run all the way to the battery. I know it's going to be a good one. I have our 2 feed and return lines set up. And then my connection to the factory wiring to go to the sending unit, the actual signal wire. Last thing to do before I put this up into place is going to be our vent line. So this is going to be a vent. There's also a vent on the hat itself. The kit comes with a little T-fitting. So basically just run, you know, a line from one line to the other, and then this one will be a longer line to this little guy right here. This is like a little vent that has a check valve in it. That way, you know, it won't let fuel come out, but it will let air come out to vent the gas tank. This will just need to be mounted up somewhere higher than the gas tank once it's mounted. We'll kind of figure that out a little bit later. Got all the fuel lines and the power lines run, just following where the factory lines went. I left a little bit of extra slack on this just because, if you guys remember in the beginning of the video, I am going to LS swap this car in the future, and I'd like to not have to remake that fuel line. So I left it a little bit long. We'll just kind of like loop it up like this. I don't really care if it doesn't look as clean as possible. When we go to full LS, then we'll worry about making it look good, but I just want to make sure we have, like I said, room to reach wherever the LS fuel rail happens to end up. So I threw the throttle body on. I'm actually going to go ahead and bolt it up, and then we can start the electrical connections. I haven't actually done the relay or anything for the fuel pump yet. It's going to be part of this next step. So I'm going to bolt the throttle body on. I'm just called the carburetor. Make sure that any vacuum ports we're not going to use, which I think there's one back here that goes to like a transmission shift modulator or something like that. We have a 4-speed in this car, so I don't need that. So we're going to have to make sure that one's plugged. Then the other ones are going to go to our vacuum advance, because the way I'm running this FiTech right now is it's only going to be doing fuel. It's not going to be doing timing, just because I have an HEI distributor that, as far as I know, is not compatible with the timing. If this engine ends up living in this car for longer, we may swap out to a distributor that it can control the timing, so we can go ahead and do both. But for now, we're just going to do fuel. So hook up our vacuum advance, our PCV valve, and also our brake booster to the vacuum lines, and we'll go from there. So I pretty much got all the wiring done, with the exception of a few small things. One of them being I didn't go pick up an inline fuse. I'd like to run one on this power that goes from the battery to the fuel pump relay. I'd like to just throw like a 30 amp fuse on there. Our pump shouldn't really pull more than 20, so if it does, I'd rather have a fuse to protect us. But like I said, I didn't pick one up, so I need to do that. That'll go on this wire here. We have another battery power, that's for the unit itself. Up here is our relay. We have that all wired up. Basically the power to what you could run to a smaller fuel pump out of the FiTech, now I just have on our control side of the relay. The other leg of that is grounded, and then of course we have our battery power on one side, the other power running back to the fuel pump. Then we have our fuel pump ground run all the way up here and grounded as well. So that's all good to go. Got our coolant temp sensor. I ended up just using the same spot that I had my gauge plugged into, so my gauge isn't going to work, but the handheld unit does display coolant temp, so it should be fine. Long term, I'd like to get in here and pull this little plug out like I said, but it's a really weird size. It's a square opening, but it's like 5/16, so you can't use a 1/4 or a 3/8 socket to get, or like ratchet to get it out. And then it's square, so you can't use like an Allen head, so I gotta like grind something to get it in there. I don't know, it's kind of a silly design, so we'll leave that to another time. Like I said, I'll have the coolant reading without that. And definitely have a lot of cleanup to do, from like wiring we don't need anymore, like this electric choke, the ground for the electric choke, a lot of cleanup. I left a lot of the wires long that I'm not using. One of them I'm not using is going to be a fan relay. We just have a mechanical fan for now, so I don't need to use that. The other one is if you have air conditioning, where it like bumps up the idle and stuff. If you have air conditioning, I don't have air conditioning yet, but I don't want to get rid of those in case we add either one of those things, or when I go to put this system on a future car or whatever. I'd rather just have them all tucked in the back there, and it might look a little ugly, but you know, I'd rather have them there. For the tack signal, let me show you around that side. Tack signal is just right off of the distributor. There's the tack output. I want to continue to run my tachometer in the car, but the FiTech needs a tack signal. So what I did, and I actually checked online and they said that this is totally fine to do, is I just created basically a jumper that just wires it off. So one connects to what used to be my tack wire, and then the other one connects into the FiTech blue wire for a tack signal. So we'll be able to run them both at the same time. As you can see, I just have my throttle linkage here, same linkage we were using before. It looks like I'm getting most of the full throttle swing. I have to see, I might have to adjust it a little bit to see if I can get a little bit more out of it. Here's our coolant temp sensor. I am just going to keep the other one kind of hanging out, zip tied out of the way for now, for when we do go to, like I said, the future of swapping that to the other side and continuing to have our gauge. That way, I don't want to have the handheld plugged in all the time, or at least visible all the time. So I'd like to be able to keep some of my regular gauges. Well, I'm hot and sweaty, so we're going to call it there for the day. I'm going to go inside and get cleaned up for dinner. This is a new style of video I'm going to try out. One, shooting just on the GoPro. I haven't seen the quality, and I might need to add an external microphone, but it's a lot easier than dealing with the big DSLR camera. And it will help make more videos, just because if it's easier, I can jump out here and make videos a lot faster. So we're going to try this. Hopefully it works out. In the next video, we're going to fire up the Camaro, hopefully, with fuel injection for the first time. I'm pretty excited about that. Not too much left on the FiTech install. Then we'll be moving on to most likely the new motorcycle project. I really want to announce that for you guys. So that's coming, I would say, within the next probably 10 days to a week, or 2 weeks maybe. So stay tuned for that. Like and subscribe if you guys haven't already. See you soon.